Hi guys, welcome to Learn with W3Schools YouTube channel. Today we're going to talk about React hooks. My name is Dr. Zeeshan. We have been talking about React throughout this course for last 10-12 days. I have uploaded a complete React course using W3Schools website, and today using the W3Schools website we're going to continue and talk about this React hooks. So in this session we try to complete as much as we can about the React hooks, and we'll try to explain what exactly are hooks, how we use the state, what is useEffect state, what is context state, and so on and so forth. So it's going to be exciting long session. I will try to complete this whole thing as soon as I can, probably within 1 hour. So it's going to be 1 hour session where we talk everything about hooks and the states and effects that we usually take into place. Okay, again using W3Schools website. As always, quick disclaimer: this is not an official W3Schools website tutorial. I just love using this website, and I'm just using it as a reference since you can easily refer to the notes and I can easily teach them. Okay, so without further ado, let's begin. Now, React hooks, what exactly we mean by React hooks? What are React hooks and what is it? So technically hooks were introduced in 16.8 version. Before that, it did not exist. So hooks allows function components to have access to state and other React features. Because of this, class components are generally no longer needed. This basically is trying to say is that hooks will allow the functional components, not the class components, the functional components. We have already talked about functional components in great depth already. So what hooks do is they allow the functional components to access the state. Now this is the key thing that we talk about whenever we go into the hooks thing. State basically means that the current state your app is in. Okay, so state here refers to the current state, means when you run your React application, whatever data that now you enter in your app or in your website, in your React app, is now remembered and understood by this state. Your state knows what the user is doing on their web page, so it has access to everything that the user is entering in on your web page. All the data in text form, input form, it knows it. So that's what basically a state means. And so this is what this all these functions allows us to do, to be able to understand the data at the real time, manage it, and then react based on that. Okay, so at runtime updates the web pages. So although hooks are generally replace the class components, there are no plans for removing these class components completely. So once you start using hooks, there's no need of using class components. So they just basically become something obsolete, but still they are there. They have not been removed completely now. Okay, so what exactly is a hook and what we use hook for? So hook allows us to hook into React features such as using the state and lifecycle methods. Okay, so a hook basically allows us to hook into React features, which are use state, use effects, use context, use reference, and all these things together. Okay, so this is what we basically calling a hook. So using a hook, we actually hook into the state of your website or a web page, and that means that no matter or whatever the state is of your current website, you can get the data from it. So you can save the data in your current state, and using hook you can get the data as well. Understand? Make a little sense? So basically, in other words, using hook, the React application will know what's going on in your website. Okay, if in a simple sense. So that's what the state basically means. So it's like giving a sixth sense to your website, or giving a control, AI control to your website. That way your React app will know what user is doing, what actions, what steps they are performing. Okay, so here's an example of hook. Don't worry if you don't understand the code, I'll try to break it down as much as I can, and then we will go through these codes later on in much more detail as well. Now, first thing, when we need to use hook, we need to import this React statement. We are using useState from React. This basically means that we have a React library, import from it in form of useState with this expression curly brackets and using React. Okay, because we will be using this useState function later on here. So now once you do import this statement, the next thing is we use function and a component, bracket start, bracket close. Then we declare our hook. This is the hook that we declare. In this case, we are declaring the useState hook. So more about this useState in the next session. But what this hook is talking about is that we declare a constant variable. We declare two variables. One is called color and second is called set color. The function of these two is that using this, we save the data in our state. Using this first variable, we read the data from our state. So this is like a set method. This is like a get method. We set the data in our state, we read the data in our from our state, and we declare our state using the function called useState. And in this case, we have given it a default value red. This is not mandatory. This is just the default value in this particular example, but you can leave it blank as well. Okay, so using useState, we are telling it that, hey, we are creating a useState hook, this one, and this entire syntax defines us that how we create a hook. Make sense? A little bit, right? Okay, so again, in other words, we have created a hook that has two main functions: one to read the data, second to write the data inside our state. Okay, and having a default value red. Now what happens is that when I click on a button, okay, if you check here, if I click on a button, it has a function called onClick. This onClick function is again an event. That means whenever user clicks on this button, an event will be triggered, which is an onClick event. So when user clicks on this button, what should happen? This is the code that has been defined here. Now this code again goes in curly brackets. They are from ECS6 expression, again the latest version of Java script. We have talked about this in ECS6 session in previous lectures. Again, if you want to follow the previous code, I have the complete given this entirely in the description. So please do check out the description. You will find all the lectures that goes beyond. Okay. So here what it is trying to do is simply saying, hey, I have an expression that uses an arrow function called set color. Okay, and then you use this set color to define the current value, which is blue. Make sense? So when the user clicks on a button, an JavaScript expression is executed. That curly brackets indicate a JavaScript expression. So whenever a JavaScript expression is executed, this expression now contains an arrow function which has no name. It's a runtime function. Okay, this function then again, as we know, every function has a body and does a certain task. So in this case, this function is actually calling another function which is set color blue. Where does this set color come from? This set color actually is coming from here. Okay, so set color blue is actually referring to this method, this function that we have defined in our hook. So we are calling our function from the hook to set the value, to change the value, to update the value. And if I have to read the value, then I will use this simple color. So the color is used just to read the value, and set color is used to, yes, update the value. So here what we are doing is, we are saying, hey, when I click on a button, execute a JavaScript function, expression, sorry. Inside the expression, I've told it, hey, I want to execute an arrow function, and that arrow function contains a body called set color blue. Okay, this is one way of doing it. Don't think this is the only way of doing it. Every programmer, every tutorial, every book has a different aspect of it. This is one of the common way of doing it. In next example, I will show you how you can create this hook on your own. It's not exactly necessary that you use all this function here, but this is typically, this is the syntax that you need to worry about. This is one way of calling an on-click event within the React using JavaScript. Okay, make sense? Wonderful. So this is what we are trying to do in this whole course here again. So every button now does the same thing. Whenever I click on a button, it changes the color. Whenever I click on a button, it changes the color. Whenever I click on a button, it changes the color. If you execute the code, you will see there are different buttons. By default, it's red because we have red set as a default state. Now, in order to print the value, what we are doing is we are calling the simple color function here. Okay, simple color is being called. Where this color comes into play, this color is actually coming from this thing here. Okay, so the color value is coming from here. This color allows us to read the data, and at the same time set color allows us to set the data. This works like a function, this works like a variable. So within and curly brackets indicate JavaScript expressions. We have talked about this. So this expression says, hey, execute and evaluate the variable color. So my favorite color becomes whatever color currently we have in our hook, which is red. So the red color is printed by default. Next, if I click on blue, see what happens. Immediately the color changes. Now if you check out the code, technically there is an event and it just calls a function called set color. It doesn't tell the HTML page that you need to update this. Keep this thing in mind. That's the key thing in understanding hooks. If you have a button here, it changes the variable's value, set color to red, this variable's value. It is not telling the browser to change the value here. But if I come click on red, it becomes red. If I click on pink, it becomes pink. If I click on green, it becomes green. How is this changing? If it's not refreshing, the page is not being refreshed. By just knowing the current state, your React page is auto updated, auto reloaded. That's the beauty of using hooks in React. So when we use hooks in React, as soon as I click on a button, because I'm changing the value of my state, because the value of state has changed, React will automatically update its value, which is this one here. So this value also gets updated because this value has changed. React knows, my state has changed. Because my state has changed, it will automatically refresh the page and update the content. So we don't need to refresh it. That's the beauty here. Understand? So that's why we use Rook. It knows what you're doing. It manages no matter which button you click on, it will change accordingly. Okay. So this, even if I select, this contents is being changed. If it were if the page was being refreshed by the browser, this selection should disappear. But it's not. It's still, I've selected the text. Even when I'm changing the content, the selection is still there. That's the beauty of it. That's what the beauty of React is. Excuse me. So you must import hook from the React statement. So we did that. First statement, you must import the hook. Here we are using the useState hook to keep the track of the application state. So current example is just using the useState feature. This one we're going to talk more about it in next session. So, and useState generally refers to the application data. So state, basically the key term here is state. It is currently referring to your current application data or properties that the React will track. It will monitor and track. If the values are changed of the state, it will update the web page automatically. Okay, hook rules. There are three basic hook rules that you need to be aware of. First, hooks can only be called inside a React function component. Okay, so in order to use a hook, you only are allowed to use you are only allowed to use what we call functional components. So that's why we say if the hooks eliminate the need of class components, because now hooks only actually work inside the functional components and you will never need to use class components again. Hooks can only be called at the top level components. So they must be at the top level components. By this we mean that they must be usually after the function we have declared, they must be declared at the top level. Okay, do not have some other statement here and then define the hook. This will not work. It must be the first line within your functional component. So we have created a functional component, we have created the line. So the two rules are satisfying there. Hooks cannot be conditional. The third rule is that it cannot be conditional. Okay, they are just simple values. You can use a condition and then set the value based on the condition. That's a different logic. But this is just a straightforward, there's no condition there. Okay, so hooks will not work in the React class components. That's it. If you use a stateful logic that needs to be reused in several components, you can build your own custom hooks. So for those advanced React developers, if you want to go into such kind of a thing, you can actually create your own custom hooks. But that's for an advanced level. Maybe we'll talk about this later on. Okay, so now moving forward, let's talk more about this useState hook and how we can use them. So the React useState hook allows us to track the state in a function component. As discussed already, the state basically is like a container that holds the current information about the current activities or current data that is in your React app. So this useState hook allows us to store this information and use it within the React app in the real time without having the need to refresh the page. So that's the key idea behind this using the useState thing. So how do we use the state? Well, the first thing that you need to do is you need to have an import statement. So what we do is we use import from the React, and then once the data is imported, we say that, hey, put it inside this useState variable. Okay, so this becomes our container. So we are importing our statement from the React library and putting it inside the useState feature. So this is the whole line that you need to write at the top of your code. Okay, so notice that we are destructing useState from React as it is named export. Okay, so this is what it is trying to do. Now, how do we initialize the useState feature? Well, We initialize our state by calling the useState in our function components. The useState accepts an initial state and returns basically the two values that are the current state and the function that the state is basically updating. In other words, in order to use it, the first statement again goes the import statement, then we call our function or a component, that whatever you're creating. Within this becomes our state hook. Here we call the useState function. Currently it does not have any argument, so it's just a blank thing. So we are using the useState. It contains two variables in a simple standard way, which basically state that we have a color variable and a set color variable. Now these two are quite important. What set color means, to set the value of the state, and then to read the value we use the color variable as well. Okay, so in order to save information in a state we will be using set color, and then in order to read the information from the state we will be using the color information. So these are like set and get methods: write the data and read the data using these square brackets, and the useState function is called to store the data. Okay, so notice that again we are destructing the returned values from the useState. So here's what we are doing is we are destructing the values. The first value, color, is our current state. It holds the current state information, and the set color is the function that is used to update our state. Okay, so these names are variables that can be named anything. So do keep in mind, in this case we are using the color, but you can name them whatever you like. Lastly, we initialize the state variable with this empty string called useState. Okay, now how do we read the state value? So for example, another code is here. We use the import statement. We call in the React code, the default that we have already been talking about. We create our function. Inside the function, we have declared our state method. Here we are using again useState red. Now notice here there's a red. In previous example there was no color, that was blank. Now we are using default value. So this is considered as a default state value. If no value has been initialized initially, this will set our default value to be of type red. Okay, so we use my favorite color is in curly brackets color value, which is this color value here. So we are calling this color value inside this color information here. Okay, now in order to set the value we will be using the set color value, but currently we are just reading the state information, so it will return us this default value which is red. So when you call in the color, it will call in this red color value. Okay, if I execute the code, you will see that my favorite value is red because the default value has been set to red. Okay, now updating the state. Now in order to update your state, we basically use this set color method. So in order to update our state, we use the state updater function which is called the set color. We should never directly set the value to color. That's the key thing that you need to follow. Color red is basically not allowed in our React state hook functions. You have to use this set color method or set color function to set the value, because this is primarily responsible for storing the value inside the state, and the color is actually responsible for reading the value. So to set the value, we can use a button on click, and then we define a function on click here, and then we set the value to color. Now notice what we've done here is we call the set color as a function and then given it an argument. Okay, so what this will do, it will set the value of the color to be blue, which then you can retrieve using the color variable here. So this will allow us to retrieve the value. Set color behaves like a function when we can call it to set the value. So now when you execute the code, what it will do is it will default say red because the default value is red. So we have a red value default. Okay, but as soon as we click on the button, it will change to blue without refreshing the page. Now because the state of the content has changed, the React will automatically update the data. That's the beauty here that you need to understand, that React will not refresh the page. As soon as there's an action or a change in state, the content will automatically update. The content is changing because we have an on click button here. We have typed button and then we've given it an event on click, curly bracket start, curly bracket close as an expression. Within it we have an arrow function. That arrow function updates the value to a set color blue. Now set color again is this set color value here. So we are calling this function and then we are giving it a new argument. So what this will do is it will change the value in my current bucket. The current value of this state will change from red to blue because the value has changed here. Because we have called this set color function, this will change the value, and wherever this color info variable has been called, that color value will automatically update. We are not changing anything else. We are not updating anything. We are not calling anything. after the button has been clicked, this information is automatically changed. Why? Because the state changed. That's why it's key and very powerful thing within our React. Okay, so what exactly can you put inside your state? Well, the use state can be used to keep track of the strings, numbers, booleans, arrays, objects, or any combination of these. We could create multiple state hooks to track individual values. So you can create multiple, you don't have to create just one. So in this example, you can see that if we have a car, we can create multiple state hooks from brand to model to year to color. Each has a set method, set brand. Again, this name can be anything. Do not make sure that it has to be set, but it's typically we use the word set to ensure that we are updating the value, and then you can use it to change whatever information you have, and you can use a set state hook as well. Okay, then constant year as a set year, use state to change the default state, and then similarly you can call it this car has a color to change the color value, or to access the color value, the default model to access the default model value, from the year value here. So if I execute the code, you would see it is a red Mustang from 1964 because this is the default value here. Then we can have a detailed form. Whatever user enters inside the form, the value will automatically update. So if you are creating a React app that or a form that requires users to enter the data and display the output simultaneously, like a CV or like a portfolio or any other thing, as soon as users entering the data, in the real time, the form is updating, the values are updating, and this becomes the beauty of it, that you don't have to even refresh anything. Okay. Next, let's talk about useEffects. Now, from the user state, it saves the data. useEffect hook allows us to perform side effects in your components. Some examples of side effects are fetching the data, directly updating the DOM model, document object model, and the timers. So useEffect accepts two arguments. The second argument is basically optional, which is the dependency. So useEffect again uses the function, the primary argument that we're going to use. So for example, we use the set timeout to count 1 second after the initial render. Okay. So how this work is that, again, in this case, we are calling our from our React, we are importing useState as well as similarly useEffect. Same thing goes here. You need to import the useEffect as well. If you're only using useEffect, you just call the useEffect thing. Then we have a function called timer. We set count to 0. So that means that currently the default state is 0. Again, integer doesn't require inverted quotations. So we have a standard hook here. Then we call the useEffect. This is the basic effect that we are calling now. Okay. So what it does is we again have a function, we declare an arrow function. Within this, we set a timeout. Default function, this has nothing technically directly to do with the effect. This is just an independent function. So we just set a set timeout and we count till 1000 seconds. And then when 1000 seconds is over, the state will update. So we return, I have rendered, count how many times we have done here. And then this is the default timer that we have, default component that we have rendered on the screen. So if you run the code, so you have say I have rendered 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. So after every second, the contents are basically updating. So you're getting this timer that how much time is left or whatever you want to do. So what's happening is without refreshing, it is telling me the time. How? It is using this useEffect, and then it's counting, or whatever effect you want to do here, automatically it will just change and update. Okay, so now it's updating automatically without refreshing the page. See, this selection is there and it's changing the content as we go along. But wait, it keeps count even though it should not count only once. Okay, so it's just keep on counting because the set count feature is just in a count plus 1. So it's just taking inside it like an infinite loop. So useEffect runs on every renderer. That means that when counting the changes, a render happens, which then triggers another effect. This is not what we want. Sometimes just want to count 1 time. So there are several ways to control the side effects run. You should always include the second parameter, which accepts an array. We can optionally pass the dependencies to useEffect in this array as well. So for example, no dependency passed. We use the useEffect, bracket start, bracket close, semicolon, and then we create an arrow function inside it, and then we give the values. So this arrow function is the first argument that we have passed here. Okay, so if you want to use a dependency, you want to use useEffect, again the arrow function, the first argument, comma, and the dependency in form of array or whatever form you want to give. Okay, so the third example is we give a prop or a state values. Again, we have talked about props and state in previous sessions. So what useEffect means that in form of the dependencies, we give it the prop and a current state. Okay, so that way it will know exactly what current state is. So to fix the issue that we only want to execute it one time, what we will do is we will add an empty brackets here. So we use the same code, but this time with the arrow function. Okay, this whole code belongs to the arrow function, comma, and we give an empty dependencies. Okay, that way now what happens is that because it has a dependency, it will depend on it. It will start one time and then stop. It will not go next time, because the counter is actually waiting for some dependency, some parameters to be executed or anything of that sort. So the dependency has that effect as well. Okay, so here's an example of useEffect hook that is dependent on a variable. If the count variable updates, the effect will run again. So instead of just holding it back, we are asking it to be dependent on a particular variable. This is again giving it like a prop. So now what we're doing, we have a state. Okay, so we give it a variable here in form of another state. So we have a calculation, set calculation, use state 0. So we use another state here. So if the state of this calculation is changing, then what we do is we ask it to change the information. So we use the effect, we say set calculation, bracket start, bracket close. Again, we declare a function here and we say count multiply by 2, and then we use another variable function here, count. Okay, so we are setting the calculation value to count multiply by 2, and then we take the count variable information and we pass it as a dependency as well. So if the count is changing, the effect will call it automatically itself. Okay, so now when you execute this code, you see that we have 0, nothing is happening, but as soon as I click on plus, the calculation becomes 2 again, because we have multiply by 2, and the count is 1 because it changed the one time. So if I click one more time, it now count, we have clicked it twice. Okay, but the calculation is 4 because now 2 multiplied by count becomes 4. So every time you click on it, only then the parameters are changing. So the use effect basically allows us to control such kind of effects and behavior inside it. Okay, so some effects require cleanup to reduce memory leaks, timeouts, subscriptions, event listeners, and other effects that are no longer needed should be disposed of. So we do this by including a return function at the end of a use state hook. So making sure everything it does not keeps on running all the time and doesn't consume too much memory. You need to have within the use effect, after you give it, for example, certain values, you need to use a return statement, clear timeout timer, and then clear. This should ensure that your effect is cleared out and it does not create more memory. Understand? Okay, so that's how the effects are used and what the purpose of effects are. Then we have something called useContext hook. So the React context hook is a way to manage state globally. It can be used together with the useState hook to share the state between deeply nested components more easily than the useState alone. Okay, so let's see a problem to understand what exactly useContext does in much more detail. So the problem is the useState should be held by the highest parent component in the stack that requires access to the state. To illustrate, we have many nested components. The component at the top and at the bottom of the state need access to the state. To do this without the context, we will need to pass the state as a props through each nested component. This is called prop drilling. Let me show you how exactly it works. So this is, for example, passing props through nested components. Okay, so in this example, we again have, let me get this code better, and then we come back here. So now we import the user state. We have a functional component. We create a user state, for example, user, set user state to Jesse Hall. The default name has been given inside the state. And then we have a user to read the data, set user to set this state value. So we have a return statement now for this particular component. It creates hello user. Okay, so it reads the user data and prints it. And then we call another component 2, and we pass it the same prop as a prop. Okay, so what this basically means that the name of this user has been passed from this function component 1 to this function component 2, and we have called the component 2 here, and we have passed it the value as a prop. So now this function 2 takes a prop. Okay, again, what exactly props are, we have talked about detail in here in the previous sessions already. So we say, hey, return component 2, and then now we print the component 2 here, but this time we call component 3. So this is what we're talking about, the deep state nested components. Okay, so we have a component 1, it's called component 2, then from within component 2 we are calling component 3, and then we are passing the same state information from component 1 to component 2 to component 3. The component 3 is also again using the same user prop that we created in component 1, and it's then again trying to use it for further references. Okay, so it's going into component 3 to component 4 to component 4. So it's like nesting every single thing together. So if we run the example, we see hello Jesse Hall, and then we have component 2, component 3, component 4, component 5, and then finally hello Jesse Hall again. So you will see that the name of this user Jesse Hall has been passed from component 1 to component 2, from component 2 to component 3, from component 3 to component 4, from component 4 to component 5, from component 5 to again inside when component 5 is called, the last item prints the hello user again, and it again prints the name. So the name of components or the state is basically retained throughout all these components. Okay. Even though component 2 to 4 did not need the state, they had to pass the state along so that it could reach to the component 5. Okay, so that's the problem here, that we had to use component 2, 3 and 4 as a dummy placeholders so that the value can be passed from one component to another component to another component to another component. Okay, and that's what we see in the output. There are nothing here, we don't use them at all. Actually this name is used inside the component 5. That's the problem that they're addressing. So now in some cases might be useful, but in certain cases that's a problem. So in this, the solution is using the context. Okay, so the solution is we create a context. So to create a context, you must import create context and initialize it. To do that, again we use the same thing, import create context from React, and because we are using state, we are also using useState, comma. So this is written in a single line. You can write it in two different lines as well. We will use the context provider to wrap the tree of components that need the state context. So basically what we're doing is that now we're going to create a context provider and we're going to wrap the tree of components inside this context provider. To do that, we will wrap the child component in the context provider and then supply the state value. How? So for example, we create a component constant user state, set state, use state to Jesse Hall. Same thing within the component 1. Then we're going to say, hey, return, and then we create a user context. This is what we are basically talking about in terms of creating the use context. And then we say dot provider. Again, this is the default name that we need to use. Value is equals to user. So now what we are doing is we are providing a user context. Okay, we are wrapping the child component in a context provider. So we are wrapping the child component inside a wrapper. So it's like the component is not written directly, but inside we wrap it inside a user context provider tag. So user context dot provider tag also contains the same user information, this one, and it has a wrapper around it. Now all components in this tree will have access to the user context. Okay, so all the components in this tree will have the context here. So whatever components are inside the user context will have access to this user information. You don't need to pass this to all components manually. In order to use the context in the child component, we need to access it using the use component hook. So the first include use context in the import statement. So now we're going to use this context, create context, and use context, again import statement will be used. Then you can access the user context in all the components. So for example, then we directly go inside the component 5. We constant user, declare a variable, we say use context because we've just imported this use context from the React, and then we're going to give it the user context, which is the variable or this information here that we just provided here. Okay, so this will allow us to have the information inside the user, and then we can very easily use the same variable here inside our component. Okay, so here's the full example how the working will basically go. So if you go inside the run and let me see how it works, you will see the hello Jesse is there, component 2, 3, 4, and then component 5 will have Jesse Hall again. But this time we will not be passing the components value to the user 2, 3 and 4. Okay, from 1 we can directly go to the user 5. How? We have import statement, we use the use state, comma create context, comma use context. We are basically importing these two new things. Okay, once these two new things are there, then we declare a constant user context create context function. Okay, so this will create a create context function and assign it to the user context information. Then we create a component. Inside the component, we have a user context dot provider and we set the value here. So we create a wrapper of this user context that allows us to store the information. Then you notice that when we call the component 2, we are not passing the value to the component 2, just like in previous example, we are passing the information to the component 2 as well as a prop. Okay, so we were passing the information to component 2, from component 2 to component 3, from component 3 to component 4. But this time we are just, hey, component 2, we might not even use this, we can skip this. Then component 2 is called, again notice there is no passing of information in component 2. And if you go inside component 3, again no passing information to component 4. Component 4 again calling component 5 but not passing any information there. Then inside component 5 now, because we have already created the use context, we are creating use context, user context information. So we are reading the information from the user context and then we are now printing here. So in other words, we use a variable component 1, sorry, not variable, we use a component 1, we create a wrapper and store the information in this context. Okay, so this context again becomes another wrapper which holds the information that can be used by now technically any component that falls under the components criteria. Okay, so then once you reach to the component 5, to use that value, you need to call that context and then access the variable information. This can be done in component 4 or 2 or 3 or 10 or whatever components you are using. That way, one component information can be used very easily and very manageable manner, in other words. Okay, so I hope that clarifies few things. So if you have watched till now, thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment. So let me know what you like and dislike about this video, and I will be making more videos on React soon. Thank you.